Origin Giants, one more reaction. This is Saladin and the Third Crusade. Crusades End, Extra History Part 5 by the channel Extra Credits. Things look bleak for Saladin. Richard I had returned and the Lionheart can be seen right outside Jerusalem. Internally, his coalition is starting to fracture. There are divisions amongst his advisor and amongst his soldier. He's certain that this is the end, but his camp isn't the only one troubled by desperate divisions. The Crusaders are beginning to see cracks in their structures as well. Who can outlast whom? Yeah, so Saladin's most of army basically went back home. Only some that left, he put that around Jerusalem to defend it, right? Richard the Lionheart, who's better military leader, but Saladin being more of a political brilliance. It's gonna be, I guess a battle of who can outlast whom apparently, because siege takes a long time, and both are having issues. So yeah, it's gonna be fun. Let's watch it.
Jerusalem, July 3rd. 1192. It's one of the darkest nights of Saladin's life. Last winter, with his forces in disarray after the defeat at Arsuf, Saladin thought he'd lose Jerusalem. But Richard's army had turned back when they were within sights of the holy city, the English king worrying that the cold weather and his fragile supply lines would not withstand a siege. Now, Richard is back, only 12 miles away, and the Sultan knows he cannot defend Jerusalem. Days ago, his emirs had pledged loyalty to his face, but he's heard that in private, they're discussing whether to abandon him, and tensions between his Turkish and Kurdish contingents are heading towards violence. So he spends a night walking in the city, accompanied by his biographer, and he prays one more time at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, tears falling onto his prayer rug. And the next morning, Saladin announces that they will abandon the holy city.
You should have done that before, man.
In July of 1192, it looked all but sure that Saladin would lose Jerusalem, even though he'd done all he could to keep it. After Richard and his army had turned back from their winter attack in 1191, Saladin then changed tactics. Because the Muslim army wasn't going to be able to defeat Richard on the field in a conventional stand-up battle, due to the coalition being too fragile and Saladin's men being too exhausted. So rather than outright fight the Crusaders, Saladin had decided to outlast them. Richard was operating far from home. And though he insisted that he would not return until he'd retaken Jerusalem, Saladin knew that was easier said than done. In fact, he knew that all too well. The Ayyubid Empire had deteriorated during his years managing the jihad, and compared to Richard, he was practically next door to his home territories. Plus, everyone knew Philip II of France was interested in acquiring the Lionheart's French possessions, meaning Richard was always nervously glancing back towards Europe.
Yeah.
So in the spring of 1192, Saladin stuck it out, attacking the Crusader supply lines and using diplomacy to exploit fractures in the Crusaders' leadership. For instance, he entered in secret negotiations with Conrad, the man holding Tyre, who was in a dispute with Guy de Lusignan over the throne of Jerusalem. That was such a bizarre knot of kidnapping and murder. We're actually going to do a whole postscript episode on it all next week, and it's gonna be a doozy. But for now, all you need to know is that Saladin did his best to exploit those divisions and keep Richard occupied. For the record, Richard eventually just put his nephew on the throne anyway, before making his second attempt at capturing Jerusalem. So on the eve of the attack, Richard's coalition already had some fault lines, and that was before he got the reports that his brother Prince John was secretly plotting to take over the throne of England.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he needed to wrap things up quickly and return home. Which brings us right back to where we started off. Saladin despondent, convinced he's about to lose Jerusalem. Yet that's when Richard made the mistake that doomed his second expedition. Now, we talked a lot last episode about how Richard was a better general than Saladin. But Saladin, you see, he was the better leader.
Yeah.
After Hattin, when Saladin had to choose between seizing the strategically important Tyre or the religiously important Jerusalem, he chose Jerusalem because he knew that if he turned away from the holy city, his troops would consider it a betrayal. But Richard, ever the good soldier, concluded that it made better military sense for this new attack to be directed toward Egypt.
Oh.
He would strike Saladin's most profitable province, and then force the Sultan to hand over Jerusalem via negotiation. Looked great on paper. The only problem was, Richard forgot he was fighting a crusade, not a war. His announcement that they would...
It's all about what people think at that point. It's a religious war, right? Not just any simple war where you have to just win areas strategically. No. You have to make sure you win over people, basically. That's why Saladin chose Jerusalem. So that's the thing, right? A leader, a diplomatic mind versus a military mind, a general. Yeah.
For a second time, turned back from Jerusalem, fatally damaged morale. Worse, he let the army get within sight of Jerusalem before changing the target to Egypt.
That's
His
fucked
war
up.
council split into factions. Both nobles and common people who'd endured years of travel, hardship, and personal suffering in order to take Jerusalem insisted on making the attack. Richard, believing it wasn't feasible and worrying for his reputation if they lost, threatened to resign as leader. So the crusade fractured, its leaders unable to agree on a strategy, and withdrew to Ascalon. Saladin, seeing this, and thanking God for the return of his incredible luck, decided to strike back at Jaffa. Saladin's forces hit the city in late July, hoping to overwhelm it and strand Richard in Ascalon. They took the outer defenses quickly, but then Saladin lost control of them. His army, still furious over the massacre at Ocre, began to execute captured Christians.
Oh.
Horrified, Saladin managed to evacuate some of the defeated Christians into the city's citadel, which still held out before reimposing discipline. A week later, they'd nearly taken that citadel when Saladin heard shouts and turned to see ships pulling close to shore.
Damn.
A strike force of knights jumped into the shallows and began running in a charge, Richard at their head. Attacked
There
from
you go.
behind, the Muslim army fled, though not before Saladin tried to stage a surprise assault, but it was spotted and broken. Yet another loss, one which brought Saladin personally to the brink of collapse. Throughout his life, Saladin had always suffered bouts of illness, years of high-stress command duties while also running an empire.
Yeah, this is something, isn't it? Yeah, I forgot about that, right? Richard the Lionheart's brother tried to overthrow him while he was on Crusade. Yeah, so this is just perfection for Saladin, right? I mean, Saladin in the past has such a great luck with the Holy Roman Emperor drowning. And, yeah, he's a great politician with a whiff of luck. Same thing happened here, because let's be honest. If Richard the Lionheart's crusade wasn't falling apart because of he was fearing what Philip would do, how he'd take over his, lands and things, his brother trying to overthrow him. If all this shit wasn't there, Richard the Lionheart would have, comfortably tried to take over Jerusalem, right, without worrying too much. And obviously, Richard the Lionheart is a great general. Richard the Lionheart, that's how he gets his name. He's a great military mind, but he's not a great politician, right? He doesn't see people's morale and what would do what, which is crucial. I mean, he just killed people's morale by twice marching to Jerusalem and turning back. You can't do that shit. I mean, you came all the way to Europe to all the way to here at Jerusalem. You come to this seeing distance, like people can see Jerusalem, and then you turn away, regardless of how great a strategic decision it was. That's just fucked up. So, it's like an even feel. He's, Saladin has great political mind. He knows how to play the field, play the people. Richard the Lionheart knows how to do a war. But, both have their equal minus point. That's why it's going to be a tie. People said it's going to be a tie, but now I understand why.
Had taken their toll. But after Jaffa, his exhaustion and digestive issues became particularly severe. Richard, ironically, was also burning with fever, fighting a camp disease. And since their armies were faring no better, fatigued and falling apart, and the Third Crusade locked in a stalemate, Al-Adil went back to the Crusader camp, and the two forces entered negotiations to end the war. Once again, Al-Adil worked his magic, displaying his courtly manners and bringing excellent gifts, reminding the Crusaders of Saladin's many good deeds towards Christian women and children, highlighting the Sultan's regular gifts to the poor, and pointing out that Jews, Greek Orthodox, and Coptic Christians lived in Muslim territory without issue. In fact, under Saladin, Coptic Christians had been invited back to Jerusalem. They'd been expelled by the Crusaders. And through Al-Adil, the Western view of Saladin began to permanently shift. During previous talks, Richard had come to like Saladin, considering him honorable and chivalrous. But now increasingly, the Crusaders respected his governance and generosity, and would bring stories of this image back to Europe. Likewise, Saladin's camp took a liking to Richard.
I mean, yeah, that is true. Richard the Lionheart didn't come there to, save the king and princes around Jerusalem with the key and everybody else. He came there for the Christianity, to make sure the holy city is stayed intact. But when he comes and realizes that, wait a minute, this is not as evil as people portrayed, Saladin is fine. He's, making sure all Christians live there safely and everything. And obviously, right now, I'm also running thin, right? I can't afford to fight. So this is perfection. I guess he's going to take all these stories and go back home. It's like, everybody lied. Saladin is not some evil Satan. It's fine. He's letting everybody live in peace, I guess.
especially since the king personally cultivated relationships with Saladin's emirs in hopes of undermining the Sultan's power base. He even offered to knight some of them. After months of haggling, they finally settled on an agreement. Muslims would hold Jerusalem, but allow unarmed Christian pilgrims to visit, while the Christian states would hold the coastal land they'd taken, with the exception that Richard would return Ascalon to Saladin, but diminish its defenses. And there would be peace between Saladin and the Crusader states for 3 years. Not something either side considered a total win. In fact, both were disappointed, but not a total loss either. And with that, Richard got on a boat and sailed back to Europe. Saladin had indeed outlasted him. Then, Saladin made celebratory tours of forts, exercising his characteristic generosity by giving away the gifts Richard had given him. Even though he'd lost most of what he'd gained after Hattin and had failed to destroy the Crusader states, he was still greeted in Damascus as a hero. Throngs of people came into the street.
I mean, he didn't lose all of it. He has Jerusalem. That's the main thing here, isn't it? He has Jerusalem.
For the champion of Islam. Happy he could finally turn to domestic and economic matters, Saladin talked about finally making the Hajj to Mecca. But the Sultan's closest advisors were worried. Even as he celebrated, they noticed his chronic fatigue and migraine headaches. Becoming more and more forgetful and easily tired, he declined in the next 3 months. Then, on March 4th, 1193, Saladin died, an imam sitting next to him, reading the Quran. And when his family went to pay his funeral expenses, they found in his personal treasury only 1 gold coin and 36 silver dinars. He owned no personal estates and had given all he had to the poor.
Dude.
In the end, his family had to borrow money to bury him. Saladin's sons fought to control the Ayyubid dynasty after his death, but it was Al-Adil who would ultimately take charge. And though in the 13th century, the Ayyubid dominance would fall apart piece by piece, for a time, it fostered a peaceful environment for trade and culture in the region. But it would be the memory of Saladin, not his achievements, that would ultimately last.
Seriously.
Remembered as a chivalrous and honorable opponent in the West, even held up as a model for European monarchs. In the Middle East, he's been cast as everything from a patriotic figure for Egyptians and Kurds to a model for pan-Arabists and those that see themselves as battling the West. Yet neither of those images are what we see when we look at the real Saladin. We see a complicated man who could be both merciful and ruthless. An inspirational leader who managed to hold on to the greatest victory of his life by the skin of his teeth, and whose greatest strength was not as a military conqueror, but as a negotiator and coalition builder, always willing to approach enemies with respect and
look. In the end, Saladin kind of won, right? Because he has Jerusalem. That's the main thing. Jerusalem is where the Crusade is. Crusade was to take Jerusalem, and Saladin still had it when he died. So he kind of won, right? But, Saladin might not be great, general military leader as Richard the Lionheart. But let's be honest, Saladin, basically, almost got defeated because his own people start to lose faith in him. I mean, you can't do that shit and expect the guy to overcome, right? Same thing happened with Richard the Lionheart. He had issues in his home too. So this crusade was like no true, dominant figure. No true dominant figure was fighting. They were all trying to convince their people to stay loyal. And that is kind of fucked up. There was no one stable, emperor of some empire who everybody just basically follows regardless of what. That was not the case here. So Saladin was pretty good. He came across Richard the Lionheart and, I guess in the end lived and, made sure that Jerusalem is with his hand, which is already a victory by itself. And yeah, that is something, right? Usually people get, king, emperor becomes something like that and gets, all this rich and wealth all the way up to their head. But in this one, he didn't have any money left. In the end, he died because he gave everything away. And we've seen that from the start. He was giving away the money that people in his ranks had to hide the money, so he wouldn't give it away, right? He was really gracious with all the people. He let go of lots of people when normally other king would not have. Saladin was really good in my book. He wasn't great military general, right? But in the end, overall, he was really good, and his victories do matter because he still had Jerusalem. When that is something.
Broker deals, a rare historical figure that in the end was respected by friends and enemies alike.
Yeah.
I don't want to brag, but Ahmed Ziad Turk, Alicia Bramble, Casey Muscha, Dominic Valenciana, Gunnar
Yeah, so basically, in the end, his deed are the reason why Richard the Lionheart could go back the way he did. Because the guy convinced Richard the Lionheart that Saladin was such a good guy and reminded about all the deeds, all the good things he did, how he let go of the people, how he let Christians in. If he hadn't done that, Richard the Lionheart had to kill him. And that would have been end really bad, but it didn't because of how good Saladin was. Alright people, that was Saladin in the Third Crusade, or Crusade's End by the channel Extra Credits. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, check out the Bricks Anti, there's a link in the description, check out the end cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.